Growing up, Avatar: The Last Airbender was one of my favourite shows. I remember watching it every week and being mesmerised by the animation and the story. The show was completely unique to everything else on TV. So, in 2010, when the live-action movie was released, you could understand my excitement, only to be hit back by a complete shit show. So, when Netflix announced their live-action series, I was apprehensive. But now that the show is out, and I've had the chance to watch it all, I thought I'd gather my thoughts. So, without stalling any further, let's get into it. The Netflix show, much like the animated one, follows a similar premise. You have the Fire Nation waging war against everyone, and after 100 years pass, Aang comes out of his icy capsule to master all four elements and restore harmony amongst the four nations. Along his journey, he makes friends as well as enemies, whilst also coming to terms with his responsibilities as the Avatar, and that's the basic premise. The show does a better job of telling the story than the movie ever could. I think it was a wise choice to break the first season into 8 roughly hour-long episodes, as I found this allowed enough time for world building and providing an insight into each character's backstory and personality. The story does take key elements from the Nickelodeon show, however it should be noted that the Netflix version doesn't follow the same path, story by story. Changes have been made, some of which were welcomed and others which I didn't like so much, but we'll get into those in a sec. In terms of the characters, I think the casting choices were great. Aang, played by Gordon Cormier, does a better job than the movies in balancing Aang's serious and childish side. The scenes where Aang comes to terms with his loss, his interactions with Gyatso, they were all good in capturing Aang's personality. You get to see a lot of fear of a child, as Aang simply wants to be a kid. He never chose this path, and yet it has been decided for him. Similar to Aang, Katara and Sokka also bear a strong resemblance to their cartoon counterparts, particularly Sokka. Just like the animated show, Katara displays a lot of affection and care towards Aang, and she believes he is the only hope they have. Also like the show, Sokka at first is skeptical, but is quick to join the crew. The same praise can be given to Zuko and Uncle Iroh. It's evident that more time was taken by the writers to understand the cartoon and how each character had been developed. And in this show, one of the highlights I would say is Uncle Iroh's deep-rooted care for his nephew. The backstory of his son's death and Zuko being there added a much better insight into the uncle and nephew's bond. There are of course many other characters in the show we could delve into, but for me, especially for the first season, I would expect these 5 characters to be done right before anyone else. So what did I like about the show? On a surface level, I want to say the CGI was a significant improvement. I thought a good job was done in visually presenting each type of bending, something which would have been difficult given the greater possibilities that can be shown in animation. From Appa and Momo to the different bending and the surrounding world, regardless of how you feel about this remake, you have to admit this was a much more appealing presentation than what we got in 2010. I also liked some of the changes that have been made. For me, the scene where Kyoshi comes into the physical world to fight the Fire Nation warriors was a change that I welcomed very much, and I actually found quite entertaining. And talking of changes, I also appreciated how the showrunner added a bit of a backstory during the first episode, just to set up subsequent events that would lead to Aang being the last airbender. The live-action characters overall were a good reflection of the cartoon ones. I know a few people are going to cry about how Sokka has been changed and how in the cartoon he's more misogynistic, which he corrects as part of his character development. But in all honesty, I don't think it's that significant. Aang's journey is also done in a way which feels sequential. It makes sense how Aang needs time to really understand the magnitude of his role in saving all the nations. You have to remember, this is a 12-year-old So it would make no sense for Aang to all of a sudden assume that position of power without any difficulty or fear. The time that was also put into developing Katara's character meant that by the finale you could see how she was getting stronger and more capable each episode, unlike the movie, where we jump from Katara being barely able to bend to all of a sudden becoming a master. The brutality of the Fire Nation is also represented here, as we see many instances of firebending being used to burn people alive. At times, it does even make you question whether this is a kids' show. However, a result in this is that it demonstrates the danger the Fire Nation represents. Now onto the things I didn't like so much. First of all, I didn't like the approach that was taken with Bumi's introduction. I thought the cartoon's way was perfect, and so to somehow get Bumi to almost resent Aang at the start for not being there for 100 years made no sense. It was a change that overcomplicated the relationship between Aang and his friend. I also didn't like the changes in the fight sequence, and overall it was just a different direction which was completely unnecessary. Whilst I praise the show of doing a better job than the film did, I will say the pacing for the show was still a bit off. Some episodes like Omashu and Warriors were unnecessarily longer, whilst other episodes due to time constraints had to be shortened to meet the 8-episode target. The result is some parts of the story we get deep insights, and other parts are rushed and only kept for the sake of staying true to the Nickelodeon show. My final complaint is that whilst I understand Aang is just a child and he is still coming to terms with his role as the Avatar, the constant self-doubt gets a bit repetitive. I understand being afraid, but refusing to learn how to waterbend because Gyatso is dead is just stupid. This constant self-doubt does eat into what should have been Aang's fun-loving and adventurous spirit. Overall, I thought the show was a good introduction into The Last Airbender for anyone that hasn't seen it, but it will never live up to the original show. So if you're someone expecting to relive your childhood memories completely in this show, prepare to be disappointed. However, if you're someone that is willing to accept the changes I mentioned, and doesn't mind the shortening of certain parts, then this will be a decent watch. Personally, I'm gonna rate the show a 6.5 out of 10. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't out of this world either. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and if you want to see more videos, hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.